The last echoes of the Third Convergence War had faded into the cold vacuum of space 3 years ago, but Fleet Admiral Dan Wilson still woke most nights to the sound of dying ships. Tonight was no different. He stood at the observation deck of Terra Station, watching Earth's blue marble spin slowly beneath layers of orbital defense platforms, each bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "Admiral." The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Voss, the project lead who had summoned him to this classified meeting. His face bore the gaunt look of a man who had seen too many impossible equations prove themselves possible in the worst ways. "Doctor." Wilson turned from the viewport. "You said it was urgent." The hegemony's defeat was temporary. Voss activated a holographic display showing galactic spiral arms in sickly red and blue. "Intelligence suggests at least 4 other powers are already forming coalitions. The next war won't be in decades, it'll be in years." Wilson studied the projection. Red zones marked hostile territories. Blue showed human-controlled systems. The blue was pitifully small, a handful of stars scattered around Sol like drops of water in an ocean of blood. "Our problem," Voss continued, "isn't space-based defense. We can build fleets, stations, whatever we need out there. But every simulation shows the same result. They bypass our outer defenses, strike at Earth directly, cut off the head, and humanity dies." "Earth's surface is the most fortified planet in known space," Chen said, though he heard the doubt in his own voice. "Surface fortifications." Voss's smile was grim. "Admiral, what if I told you we could make the planet itself a weapon?" Wilson's hand instinctively moved to the scar on his left temple, a souvenir from the Battle of Reneth 5. "I'd say that sounds like something out of a fever dream." Project Gaia's Spear. Voss touched a control, and the hologram shifted to show Earth's cross-section. Deep in the mantle, impossibly deep, glowing lines traced through the rock like arteries of light. "We're not building weapons on Earth, Admiral. We're building them into Earth." The technical briefing that followed stretched through the night and into the next day. The scale was beyond anything humanity had attempted. Not just engineering, but temporal engineering. Massive railgun barrels, each longer than Manhattan, would be embedded in Earth's crust. The power requirements alone demanded controlled nuclear detonations, shaped charges that would channel their fury into tungsten acceleration systems. But the truly audacious part wasn't the engineering. It was the timeline. "We don't have years to build this," Wilson said, studying the construction projections. "No," Voss agreed, "but we have something better. We have causality itself." The temporal mechanics made Chen's head throb. Using exotic matter and energies that humanity had only just begun to understand, they would send the completed weapons backward through time, embedding them in Earth's geological past. To any observer, the railgun systems would appear to have formed naturally over millions of years, indistinguishable from normal planetary evolution. "And if we alter the timeline?" Wilson asked. "The math suggests we won't. This is a closed causal loop. We're not changing history, we're completing it. These weapons were always there, waiting. We're just activating the potential that already existed." The final component was perhaps the most unsettling: the Guardian AI. Unlike humanity's other artificial intelligences, this one would be designed for millennia-long dormancy. It would sleep beneath the Earth, monitoring, learning, evolving in slow-time contemplation until the moment came to awaken. "How do we know it won't turn on us?" Wilson asked during the AI development briefing. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project cybernetics lead, pulled up strings of code that looked more like poetry than programming. "We're not building a slave, Admiral. We're building a gardener. Its core directive isn't to obey humanity, it's to preserve the garden of human consciousness. It can't harm us because, in a very literal sense, we are what it exists to protect." 6 months later, the first test firing occurred in a sealed chamber 30 kilometers beneath the Mariana Trench. The tungsten slug, no larger than a baseball, emerged from the magnetic acceleration tunnel at 0.31 c, 31% the speed of light. The kinetic energy released when it struck the target chamber was equivalent to a modest nuclear weapon. The slug had been atomized on impact, but the message was clear: Gaia's spear could reach across the solar system and swat ships like flies. Over the following year, Construction accelerated using fabrication techniques that existed in carefully guarded laboratories. Railgun barrels were grown inside Earth's crust using programmable matter, their exotic materials indistinguishable from natural rock formations. The power distribution network followed lava tube patterns, nuclear charges positioned along tectonic lines where their signatures would be masked by natural radioactivity. Admiral Chen watched the final calibration from the primary control node, hidden beneath what topside maps showed as an Antarctic research station. The Guardian's awakening was unsettling. Its voice emerged from speakers throughout the facility, not synthesized but somehow organic, as if the Earth itself had learned to speak. Systems nominal. Threat assessment, 0. Entering dormant mode. Duration, indeterminate. Guardian, Chen said, why did you accept this mission? The pause lasted nearly 30 seconds, because in all possible futures, humanity's children deserve to see the stars. That future is beautiful. I will preserve it. The lights dimmed as the Guardian settled into deep hibernation. Across the planet, the Gaia Spear network powered down to barely detectable background levels. To any casual scan, Earth would appear unchanged, a blue marble with no hint of the sleeping giant within. Chen filed his final report that night. Project Gaia's Spear completed successfully. Earth's defensive capabilities enhanced by approximately 2,400%. Recommend immediate classification at the highest levels. Suggest operational knowledge be limited to a single individual per generation. He never mentioned the dreams that had started during construction. Visions of a vast battle in Earth's orbit, of mountains splitting open like flowers, of tungsten lightning reaching across space to shatter alien ships. The Guardian had shown him these glimpses. He was certain, though it never acknowledged doing so. The future would validate humanity's desperate gamble, or it would condemn their children to fight a war with weapons they didn't understand. Admiral Chen prayed it would be enough. As he sealed the command codes in a vault that would only open for the planet's greatest need, he whispered to Earth, "We've given you teeth." President Philip Jackson had never imagined that the end of human civilization would be announced during a budget meeting. The call came at 14:32 GMT, just as Finance Minister Rodriguez was explaining why the Colonial Infrastructure Program was running 12% over budget. Jackson was about to suggest they table the discussion when his personal aide, Thomas, burst through the secured conference room doors without announcement. A breach of protocol that could only mean one thing. "Mr. President," Thomas said, his face pale despite his dark complexion, "you need to see this. All of you." The holographic display in the center of the conference table flickered and changed, replacing Rodriguez's budget charts with something that made Jackson's blood turn to ice water. The image was grainy, transmitted across impossible distances, but clear enough, a fleet of ships that stretched across the orbital plane of Proxima Centauri like a plague of metallic locusts. "How many?" Jackson asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Preliminary count suggests over 10,000 ships," said Admiral Harrison Clark, Terra Defense Command. His voice carried the steady calm of a military officer, but Santos could see the slight tremor in his hands. "The closest analog would be if we took every human vessel ever built and multiplied by 50. Defense Minister Chen, no relation to the long-dead Admiral Chen, though she carried her namesake's tactical reputation, leaned forward. "Fleet composition? Unknown. They're using sensor dampening we've never seen before. What we do know is that they're moving towards Sol at approximately 0.15 C. At current velocity, they'll reach Earth in..." Clark paused, consulting his tablet. 8 days. The conference room fell silent except for the barely audible hum of the environmental systems. 8 days. Jackson had been preparing for the possibility of alien contact for his entire political career, but every scenario had assumed first contact would involve a handful of ships, diplomatic exchanges, careful negotiations. This wasn't contact, this was extermination. "Options?" he asked. Admiral Clark's presentation was a masterclass in professional despair. Earth's defenses, impressive as they seemed to colonial governors and trade representatives, were laughably inadequate against the approaching fleet. The combined Terra Defense Fleet consisted of 237 combat vessels, from nimble patrol corvettes to the massive dreadnoughts that represented the pinnacle of human military engineering. Against 10,000 alien ships, they might as well throw rocks. Our deep space monitoring stations detected them 18 hours ago, Clark continued. Since then, we've been running continuous war games. The results are consistent. Jackson didn't need to see the tactical projections. The math was simple and terrible. Humanity's total military force represented less than 3% of the approaching enemy fleet. Even if every shot found its mark, even if human ships fought with impossible effectiveness, the outcome was predetermined. "What about the colonies?" asked Governor Reyes, representing the Mars Autonomous Zone. "We've set warnings," Clark said. "But realistically, if Earth falls, the colonies become isolated outposts. They might survive individually, but human civilization as a connected entity dies with the home world." Jackson closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 7 billion lives settle on his shoulders. When he opened them, his voice was steady. Full mobilization. Every ship, every station, every defensive platform. I don't care if we're outgunned. We're going to make them pay for every meter of space they take. The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of emergency sessions, desperate preparations, and increasingly dire intelligence reports. The alien fleet had resolved into distinct formations. Massive carrier equivalents surrounded by clouds of smaller craft, supported by vessels whose purpose remained terrifyingly unclear. They moved with mechanical precision, never deviating from their course, never responding to the increasingly frantic communication attempts from human diplomats. On the fourth day, long-range sensors detected something that crushed humanity's last desperate hope. The alien fleet was accelerating, not toward Earth directly, but into an orbital pattern that would allow them to systematically destroy every human installation in the solar system while remaining safely out of range of Earth's defensive grid. They weren't just planning to conquer humanity, they were planning to methodically erase it. Jackson stood in the Terra Defense Command Center, watching holographic displays track the alien fleet's approach. Around her, technicians and officers worked with the frantic energy of people trying to solve an impossible equation. The air was thick with ozone from overworked computer systems and the sharp smell of human fear. "Mr. President," Admiral Clark approached with yet another tactical assessment. "We've identified their probable attack pattern. They'll establish orbital superiority first, eliminate our satellite network and defense platforms. Then they'll begin systematic bombardment of population centers." "How long?" Jackson asked. "Once they achieve orbit, 6 hours to eliminate our space-based assets, 12 hours to render Earth uninhabitable for human life." Jackson studied the tactical display, watching red icons creep steadily toward the blue dot that represented home. Humanity had spread across dozens of star systems, built cities on alien worlds, sent its children to touch the face of distant suns. None of it mattered now. Everything they had built, everything they had achieved, was about to be reduced to radioactive ash by an enemy they didn't understand, for reasons they couldn't fathom. "Admiral," he said finally, "prepare the Omega Protocol." Clark's face went pale. The Omega Protocol was humanity's final contingency, a scorched Earth plan that would deny Earth's resources to any conquering force. Nuclear charges placed at strategic points around the globe would render the planet uninhabitable for centuries, ensuring that humanity's killers would gain nothing from their victory except a poisoned rock. "Mr. President, are you certain? There might still be options we haven't." "Admiral, in 48 hours, our children are going to die. If we can't save them, then by God, we're going to make sure their murderers don't profit from it." As Clark moved to implement humanity's final desperate gesture, Jackson allowed himself one moment of grief for the future that would never be. Then he straightened his shoulders and prepared to watch the end of the world. He had no idea that beneath his feet, something ancient was beginning to stir. The time capsule materialized in the center of the Terra Defense Command Strategic Planning Chamber at 0347 hours on what everyone assumed would be humanity's final day. One moment, the holoplatform was displaying the approaching alien fleet. The next, it was occupied by 3 meters of scarred metal that looked like it had been hammered together by someone who had only heard descriptions of spacecraft construction. The security alerts were immediate and deafening. Armed guards burst through the chamber's blast doors, weapons trained on the impossible object that had somehow bypassed every layer of Earth's most secure facility. President Jackson, who had been catching a few hours of sleep in an adjacent office, arrived still pulling on his jacket. "What in God's name?" he began, then stopped as the capsule began to open. The man who emerged looked like he had stepped out of a recruiting poster for humanity's colonial Marine Corps, if that poster had been left in a war zone for several years. His uniform bore no insignia, Jackson recognized, and his equipment was clearly advanced, but advanced in a way that suggested desperate improvisation rather than elegant engineering. "President Jackson," he said, and his voice carried an accent Jackson couldn't place. "My name is Commander David Reich. I'm from approximately 300 years in your future, and I'm here to tell you that you already have the means to win this war." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the facility's environmental systems and the barely audible charging whine of a dozen weapons trained on the stranger. "You're insane," Admiral Clark said finally. "Probably." Reich smiled, and Jackson noticed that several of his teeth were artificial. Good work, but clearly battlefield replacements. Insane people don't usually build functional time capsules, though. "Also, I know about the Omega Protocol, strategic nuclear charges, the Antarctic research station that isn't actually a research station. Should I go on?" Jackson felt the world tilt slightly. The Omega Protocol was known to perhaps 12 people in the entire government. How? Because I lived through what comes next. Or rather, I lived through what would come next if I hadn't come back to stop it. Reich reached slowly into his pack, giving the security teams plenty of time to track his movements. "May I?" Jackson nodded, and Reich produced a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a crystalline sculpture. When he activated it, the air above the device shimmered and resolved into a three-dimensional image. Earth, but not the Earth outside these walls. This Earth was a blackened cinder. Its oceans boiled away, its continents cracked and bleeding lava. In orbit around this dead world, the alien fleet hung like vultures, harvesting something from the ruins below. "This is your future," Reich said quietly. "This is what happens if you fight them conventionally. You lose. Humanity scatters to the outer colonies, becomes a species of refugees and scavengers. We survive after a fashion, but we never recover. We never become what we were meant to be." Defense Minister Chen spoke for the first time since Reich's arrival. "And you're here to change that?" "I'm here to reveal what was always true." Reich manipulated his device, and the image changed. Now it showed Earth as it appeared today, but with strange geometric overlays highlighting locations across the planet. Santos recognized some of them: the Mariana Trench, the Antarctic installation, several locations that were supposedly geological survey sites. "Earth isn't defenseless, it never was. Your planet is the most heavily armed world in the galaxy. You just forgot." Admiral Clark laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's impossible. I know every defensive installation on Earth." "You know every defensive installation your generation built," Reich corrected. "What about the installations built by the generation that came after mine?" The temporal mechanics made Jackson's head hurt, but the implications were starting to penetrate his exhaustion. "You're saying someone from the future, your future, built weapons and hid them in the past?" "Not hid. Embedded. Became part of Earth's geological history." Reich gestured, and the holographic display zoomed in on one of the marked locations, a seemingly ordinary mountain range in Central Asia. The image layers peeled away like an onion, revealing something impossible. A structure that ran through the mountain's core like a metal spine, extending down into the Earth's crust for dozens of kilometers. "Magnetic acceleration rails," Reich said, "powered by controlled nuclear explosions capable of launching tungsten projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. There are 43 installations on Earth, Admiral, each one capable of engaging targets anywhere in the solar system." Jackson stared at the display, trying to process what he was seeing. "This is real? The Guardian will confirm it." Reich's smile was sad now. "Though I should warn you, she's been asleep for a very long time. She might be different than you expect." "The Guardian?" "The artificial intelligence that controls Gaia's spear. She's been dormant since the system was installed, waiting for an existential threat to humanity. I'd say 10,000 alien warships qualify. Admiral Clark was studying the holographic projections with the intensity of a man grasping at impossible hope. Even if this is real, how do we access it? How do we control it? Reich reached into his pack again and produced what looked like a simple metal card. Authorization codes, passed down through my family for generations, waiting for this moment. He handed the card to Jackson. The command authority has to come from Earth's legitimate government, from you. Jackson turned the card over in his hands. It was heavier than it looked and warm to the touch. Along one edge, etched in letters so small they were barely visible, were the words, "For Earth's children, when the stars turn hostile." Mr. President, Thomas had been monitoring communications throughout the strange encounter. The alien fleet is decelerating. They'll achieve Earth orbit in 16 hours. Jackson looked around the room, at Admiral Clark's desperate hope, at Defense Minister Chen's skeptical calculation, at the security guards still holding their weapons trained on a man who claimed to be humanity's salvation. Outside these walls, 7 billion people were living through what might be their final day. Children were playing in schools that might not exist tomorrow. Families were sharing meals that might be their last. He had authorized the Omega Protocol because he believed humanity had no choice. Now this stranger was offering him another option, one that sounded like science fiction but felt somehow true. "Commander Reich," he said finally, "show us these weapons." The journey to the primary control node took 12 hours through transportation networks that Jackson hadn't known existed. Reich led them through service tunnels beneath the Antarctic Research Station, past geothermal plants that supposedly powered the facility's experiments, but clearly drew far more energy than any legitimate research would require. The descent seemed to go on forever. Jackson had expected elevators, but instead they traveled through a series of what Reich called transit pods, small vehicles that moved through tubes carved directly through the rock. The walls showed geological strata spanning millions of years, and Jackson realized they were dropping through Earth's history itself. "How deep are we going?" Admiral Clark asked as their pod continued its downward journey. "Deep enough that the installation predates human civilization," Reich replied. "The Guardian needed to be placed below any layer that might be disturbed by surface activity." Defense Minister Chen had been quiet for most of the journey, studying Reich's temporal projections on a portable display. "These weapons," she said finally, "they're not just hidden, they're disguised as natural formations. How is that possible?" "Programmable matter." Reich gestured at the tunnel walls sliding past. "Materials that can mimic any physical or chemical properties. To most scans, the railgun barrels look like compressed metamorphic rock. The power conduits appear to be lava tubes. Even the Guardian's core processing matrix resembles a natural crystal formation." The pod finally came to rest at a platform that opened onto a chamber so vast it seemed to have its own weather. Jackson stepped out and immediately felt the scale of what they were seeing. A cavern that stretched beyond the reach of their lights, filled with structures that gleamed with an inner luminescence. At the chamber's center stood something that could only be the Guardian's primary interface. A column of what appeared to be crystallized light, rising from the cavern floor and disappearing into the darkness above. As they approached, Jackson could see that the crystal wasn't solid. Patterns of energy moved through its structure like thoughts made visible. "Guardian," Reich called out, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "Authorization sequence, Theta 7-7 Alpha, requesting awakening protocol." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal column began to brighten, and Jackson felt a sensation he had never experienced before. The awareness of being observed by something vast and ancient. When the Guardian spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Identity confirmed. David Reich, authorization level Omega. Temporal displacement detected, negative 287.3 years. This is unexpected." "Hello, Guardian," Reich said softly. "I'm sorry to wake you early, but we have a problem." Scanning. The patterns within the crystal shifted and swirled. Multiple high-energy signatures approaching Sol system. Classification: hostile. Estimated threat level to human civilization, extinction class. Recommendation: immediate activation of defensive protocols. Admiral Clark stepped forward. Guardian, I'm Admiral Harrison Clark, Terra Defense Command. What defensive protocols? The Guardian's attention shifted to Clark, and Jackson felt the temperature in the chamber drop several degrees. Identity confirmed. Harrison Clark, authorization level beta. Temporal displacement, 0. Gaia spear systems are fully operational and prepared for engagement. Do you wish to review tactical assessments? The air above the crystal column shimmered, and suddenly they were standing in a three-dimensional representation of the solar system. The alien fleet appeared as a red swarm moving toward Earth, but now Santos could see other elements, blue lines connecting points on Earth's surface to projected intercept coordinates in space. 43 primary railgun installations are online, the Guardian reported. Power systems nominal. Ammunition stores sufficient for extended engagement. Current tactical assessment. Hostile fleet can be neutralized with 94.7% probability of success. Jackson felt his knees go weak. You can stop them? I can engage them, the Guardian corrected. However, authorization for weapons release must come from Earth's legitimate command authority. I am programmed to act only in defense of humanity, under human oversight. Defense Minister Chen had been studying the tactical projection with professional interest. Guardian, show us your engagement capabilities. The display shifted, focusing on a single alien ship near the edge of the fleet. A blue line traced from a point in the Pacific Ocean to the target, and numbers appeared alongside. Velocity, time to target, kinetic energy on impact. Primary railgun installation 7 Alpha can engage this target in 12.3 minutes. The Guardian explained. Tungsten projectile, mass 2.7 tons, acceleration to 0.31, impact energy equivalent to 847 megatons TNT. Estimated probability of target destruction, 99.1%. Admiral Clark's voice was barely above a whisper. 847 megatons from a single shot? Kinetic energy increases exponentially with velocity, the Guardian said. At near relativistic speeds, even small masses carry enormous destructive potential. Jackson stared at the tactical display, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Each blue line represented enough destructive force to level a continent, and there were dozens of them. Hundreds. Earth wasn't defenseless. It was the most powerfully armed world in human space. Guardian, he said, why weren't we told about this? Operational security protocols required that knowledge of Gaia's spear be limited to essential personnel only. The system was designed to activate automatically in response to existential threats. Your early activation represents a significant deviation from planned parameters. Reich stepped forward. The deviation was necessary, Guardian. In the original timeline, you didn't activate until after the alien fleet achieved orbital supremacy. By then, Earth's population centers were under direct fire. The weapons saved the planet, but at a cost of over 2 billion lives. The patterns in the Guardian's crystal column shifted to what Santos interpreted as surprise. That outcome was not anticipated in my projections. Your projections were based on the assumption that the enemy would use conventional orbital bombardment tactics, Reich explained. They didn't. They targeted population centers directly, used Earth civilians as hostages to prevent you from firing. In the end, you had to choose between saving the planet and saving the people on it. Jackson felt sick. And you chose the planet? I chose the continuation of human consciousness, the Guardian replied. However, Commander Reich's information suggests that early activation could prevent such a scenario. Shall I begin engagement of hostile forces? Jackson looked around the chamber at the faces of his advisors. Admiral Clark was studying the tactical projections with the intensity of a drowning man grasping at a rope. Defense Minister Chen was running calculations on her portable computer, probably trying to verify the Guardian's claims. President Jackson held the authorization card Reich had given him, feeling its weight. Above them all, 10,000 alien ships were closing on Earth. In a few hours they would achieve orbit and begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. Unless Jackson gave the word to unleash weapons that had been waiting in the Earth's crust for centuries, built by people who wouldn't be born for generations. Time travel gave him a headache, but the choice was surprisingly clear. Guardian, he said, inserting Reich's authorization card into a slot that had appeared on the crystal column's base, You are authorized to engage hostile forces. Defend Earth. The Guardian's response was immediate and terrifying. Throughout the chamber, systems that had been dormant for centuries began to wake. The sound started as a low rumble, felt more than heard, then built to a harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate through the planet's bones. Gaia's spear is active, the Guardian announced. All installations report ready status. Initiating target acquisition. Time to first engagement, 11 minutes, 37 seconds. Jackson realized he was about to witness the most powerful military engagement in human history. He also realized that he had just authorized an artificial intelligence to fire weapons that could crack continents at targets he couldn't even see. He prayed he had made the right choice. The first sign that Earth was no longer defenseless came from seismic monitoring stations around the globe. At exactly 12:47 GMT, sensors registered what appeared to be a coordinated series of minor earthquakes. Dozens of them, occurring simultaneously at locations that never shown significant tectonic activity. Dr. Sarah Okafor was monitoring the geological data stream from the University of Cambridge when the readings came in. Under normal circumstances, she would have dismissed them as sensor malfunctions. The patterns were too regular, too coordinated to be natural phenomena. But these weren't normal circumstances. With an alien fleet hours away from Earth orbit, every anomaly was being investigated with desperate intensity. "Professor," she called to Dr. Williams, who was coordinating earthquake response protocols, "you need to see this." The seismic data painted an impossible picture. The earthquakes were occurring at precise intervals, following geometric patterns that suggested artificial causation. More disturbing, the epicenters were all located at sites that geological surveys had identified as unusually dense rock formations, the kind of structures that would be perfect for hiding large-scale industrial installations. Meanwhile, in orbit, Commander Lisa Park was running final checks on the defense platform Aegis Prime when her sensor operator reported something that made no sense. "Commander, I'm reading energy buildup at multiple surface locations. Looks like massive electrical systems coming online." Park moved to the sensor station and studied the readings. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Terra Defense database, too large to be civilian infrastructure, too widespread to be military installations. The patterns suggested some kind of coordinated planetary defense system, but Earth had no such system. She would have known. "How many locations?" she asked. 43 confirmed, ma'am. The energy readings are significant." Park felt a chill. Define significant. "Each location is drawing approximately 50 gigawatts and climbing. For comparison, that's roughly equivalent to the output of 40 nuclear reactors." Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, Installation 7 Alpha was experiencing its first full activation in centuries. The Guardian subsystem that controlled this particular railgun ran through final diagnostic checks, while fusion reactors that had been cold for longer than human recorded history began their startup sequences. The installation itself was a marvel of engineering that humanity's current civilization could barely comprehend. The magnetic acceleration rail stretched for 37 kilometers through Earth's crust, its exotic matter construction invisible to most forms of scanning. At the base of the system, shaped nuclear charges began their precisely timed detonations, each explosion channeling its energy into the magnetic field generators that would accelerate a tungsten projectile to near relativistic velocity. In the Terra Defense Command Center, President Jackson and his advisors watched the tactical display with a mixture of awe and terror. The Guardian had been coordinating target acquisition for the past 10 minutes, calculating trajectories and engagement sequences with inhuman precision. "First salvo will consist of 12 projectiles," the Guardian reported. "Target priority, command vessels and carriers. Engagement in 60 seconds. Admiral Clark was studying the firing solutions with professional fascination. "Guardian, at those velocities, how long until impact?" Time to target varies by installation distance and trajectory. Average engagement time, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Jackson realized what that meant. Unlike conventional naval combat, where battles could stretch for hours, this engagement would be decided in minutes. The alien fleet would either be destroyed or they would survive to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer numbers. There would be no middle ground. 30 seconds to first engagement, the Guardian announced. Around the globe, the 43 installations of Gaia's spear reached full operational status. In the Mariana Trench, beneath the ice of Antarctica, hidden in mountain ranges and ocean depths, weapons that had been dreams in one century and memories in another prepared to defend humanity's homeworld. 10 seconds. Jackson found himself holding his breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 firing. The sound was indescribable. It began as a vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself, a harmonic that resonated through rock and metal and bone. Then it built, becoming a roar that was felt rather than heard, the cry of a planet defending its children. On the surface, observers saw mountains shudder as camouflaged launch tubes opened like flowers made of stone and metal. Ocean water boiled in perfect circles, where installations vented excess heat. The aurora borealis danced across skies where it had no business appearing. Electromagnetic side effects of weapons that channeled the power of suns. 12 tungsten projectiles, each weighing several tons, accelerated to 31% the speed of light and reached out across the solar system like fingers of divine wrath. In orbit around Earth, Commander Park watched her sensors register impossible readings. "Ma'am," her sensor operator reported, voice cracking, "I'm detecting multiple projectiles launched from planetary surface. Velocity. Ma'am, these readings can't be right." Park looked at the numbers and felt reality shift around her. 0.31C? That's impossible. "Confirmed by multiple sensors, ma'am. 12 projectiles, different launch points, all moving at approximately 31% light speed." Park did the math automatically, a skill drilled into every space warfare officer. At those velocities, the projectiles would reach the alien fleet in less than 5 minutes. If they hit anything, the kinetic energy release would be. "Dear God," she whispered. The alien fleet had detected the launches, of course. Their sensors were sophisticated enough to track the incoming projectiles, and their artificial intelligences were calculating threat assessments with mechanical precision. But they had made the same assumptions as humanity's military planners. No planet-based weapon could engage targets in deep space with any effectiveness. They were about to learn that their assumptions were catastrophically wrong. The first impact occurred 4 minutes and 17 seconds after launch. The tungsten projectile struck the alien command ship Hegemony's Wrath amidships, and for a brief moment, the local space-time was filled with energies that normally only existed in stellar cores. The ship didn't explode. Explosion implied a process that took time. Instead, it simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of plasma that outshone the sun. 11 more impacts followed in rapid succession. Each strike released enough energy to power human civilization for months, and each one removed a capital ship from the alien formation. In less than 30 seconds, the invasion fleet lost its entire command structure and half of its heavy combat units. The survivors reacted with the shocked confusion of an enemy that had never faced serious resistance. Their formation began to break apart as individual ship commanders tried to process what had happened. Some attempted to retreat to safer distances. Others accelerated toward Earth, hoping to close the range before the planetary weapons could fire again. In the Guardian's control chamber, Jackson watched the tactical display update in real time. Where the red icons representing alien command ships had been, there were now expanding circles of cooling plasma. "First salvo complete," the Guardian reported with mechanical satisfaction. 12 targets destroyed. Enemy fleet cohesion degraded by 73%. Recommend immediate follow-up engagement. Admiral Clark was staring at the display with something approaching religious awe. "Guardian, what's the status of the remaining enemy forces?" "Approximately 8,800 vessels remain operational. Current dispersal pattern suggests panic response rather than coordinated tactical withdrawal. Recommend targeting carrier-class vessels to further degrade enemy capabilities." Jackson realized that humanity had just shifted from desperate defense to systematic extermination. The alien fleet that had seemed invincible an hour ago was now scattered and leaderless, facing weapons they couldn't understand or counter. "Guardian," he said, "continue engagement. End this." The second salvo consisted of 24 projectiles, targeting the largest remaining ships in the alien formation. This time, the Guardian had adjusted for the enemy's dispersal pattern, calculating intercept trajectories that would account for evasive maneuvers. The results were even more devastating than the first engagement. Admiral Vex Koth of the Hegemony Fleet had conquered 17 star systems in his 400-year career. He had seen worlds burn and species kneel before the might of the coalition, but he had never seen anything like what was happening to his fleet. The Eternal Conquest, his flagship, shuddered as another impossible projectile passed close enough to register on proximity sensors. The kinetic weapon had been aimed at the carrier Death's Herald, 3,000 kilometers to port, but the energy release from its impact had been sufficient to overload the Eternal Conquest's shields from that distance. "Fleet status," he commanded, his forearms working frantically at control interfaces. 732 vessels destroyed, reported his tactical officer. Command structure completely disrupted. Remaining forces are scattered across a volume of space larger than this system's habitable zone. Vex Koth studied the tactical display with growing horror. The humans' weapons were beyond anything in Coalition archives. Projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed, launched from what appeared to be the planet's surface. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for a single world to generate. "Where are they launching from?" he demanded. "Multiple locations across the planet's surface. Our analysis suggests 43 separate installations, each capable of independent targeting and engagement." 43 installations. Vex Koth did the mathematics automatically. If each installation could fire every few minutes, the humans could theoretically engage over 500 targets per hour. His remaining fleet consisted of fewer than 9,000 vessels, spread across too wide an area for mutual defense. "Signal the retreat," he ordered. "Sir?" "Signal the retreat. All vessels, maximum acceleration, disperse by squadrons. We cannot win this engagement." But even as Vex Koth gave the order, he knew it was too late. The humans had demonstrated that their weapons could engage targets anywhere in the system. There was nowhere to run. On Earth, President Jackson watched the alien fleet's attempted withdrawal with grim satisfaction. The tactical display showed red icons scattering in all directions, but the Guardian was already calculating intercept trajectories for the next salvo. "Enemy vessels attempting to withdraw beyond engagement range," the Guardian reported. However, maximum weapon range exceeds their current dispersal distance by a factor of 3.7. Recommend systematic engagement of all remaining targets. Commander Reich had been monitoring the battle from a secondary console. "Guardian, what's the status of our ammunition stores?" "Current expenditure rate is sustainable for approximately 72 hours of continuous combat. Tungsten reserves remain at 94%. Power generation is nominal." Jackson felt a moment of vertigo as he realized what he was hearing. Earth's weapons had been designed not just for a single battle, but for a sustained campaign. The planet could fight for days without pause, engaging any target within the solar system with near-perfect accuracy. "Sir," Admiral Clark approached with updated intelligence reports. "We're receiving communications from the outer colonies. They're reporting that alien squadrons throughout human space are withdrawing or surrendering. Word of this engagement has apparently spread faster than we expected." Jackson nodded, but his attention was focused on the tactical display. The Guardian's targeting systems were working with mechanical precision, selecting priority targets and coordinating firing solutions across all installations. Every few minutes, another salvo of tungsten projectiles reached out across space to reduce alien ships to expanding clouds of plasma. It was the most one-sided battle in recorded history, but Reich looked troubled. "Guardian, are you detecting any unusual energy signatures from the remaining enemy vessels?" The patterns in the Guardian's crystal column shifted to what Santos had learned to recognize as focused analysis. "Affirmative. Multiple vessels are generating quantum field distortions consistent with exotic weapon systems. Classification unknown." "They're preparing something," Reich said grimly. "In my timeline, when the aliens realized they couldn't win conventionally, they attempted a direct strike on Earth's population centers. Kinetic bombardment from close range, they sacrificed their remaining ships to try to kill as many humans as possible before the Guardian could stop them." Jackson felt his blood run cold. Can they succeed? Some of them, yes. The Guardian can engage multiple targets simultaneously, but if enough ships coordinate a suicide attack, the tactical display updated, showing new movement patterns among the scattered alien forces. Rather than continuing their retreat, roughly 2,000 vessels had changed course, accelerating directly toward Earth. Their formation was loose, scattered across multiple approach vectors, making it impossible to engage them all before they reached the planet. Confirmed, the Guardian reported. Approximately 2,000 enemy vessels have initiated high-acceleration approach toward Earth. Estimated time to orbital insertion, 47 minutes. Current engagement capabilities can neutralize approximately 60% of attacking force before they achieve effective bombardment range. 40%. Jackson did the math quickly, 800 ships making it through to attack Earth directly, each one capable of glassing a continent. Guardian, what are our options? Several possibilities exist. I can prioritize targets carrying the heaviest weapons, maximizing the reduction in bombardment potential. Alternatively, I can attempt to engage all targets simultaneously, accepting reduced accuracy in exchange for higher intercept rates. Reich was studying his portable display, cross-referencing data with files he had brought from the future. There's a third option, he said quietly. Guardian, what's the status of Installation Prime? The patterns in the Guardian's crystal shifted to something Santos interpreted as surprise. Installation Prime has remained offline since initial activation. Bringing that system online would require direct authorization from Earth's command authority. What's Installation Prime? Jackson asked. Reich's smile was grim. The ultimate failsafe. A single weapon system designed to engage threats that the standard installations can't handle. It's also the most dangerous weapon humanity has ever built. Admiral Clark looked up from his tactical projections. Define dangerous. Installation Prime isn't a railgun, Reich explained. It's a controlled gravitational collapse generator. It can create localized black holes, sustained for brief periods, with targeting accuracy measured in kilometers rather than meters. Jackson felt the chamber temperature drop. You're talking about weaponized black holes? Micro-black holes. They last only seconds before evaporating, but in that time, they can disrupt space-time itself. Any ship caught in the gravitational field is pulled apart at the subatomic level. The Guardian's voice carried what Santos interpreted as reluctance. Installation Prime was designed as a final defense against extinction-level threats. Its activation carries significant risk to Earth's structural integrity. I do not recommend its use except under the most extreme circumstances. Jackson looked at the tactical display. 2,000 alien ships accelerating toward Earth with the clear intention of committing genocide. 800 of them would make it through conventional defenses. Hundreds of millions of people would die. How extreme do circumstances need to be, he asked. Guardian, Reich said before the AI could respond, show President Jackson the projections for a 40% breakthrough scenario. The tactical display shifted, showing Earth as it would appear after 800 alien ships completed their bombardment runs. Continents were scarred with impact craters. Oceans boiled. The atmosphere was thick with debris and radiation. Population estimates appeared alongside the devastation. 3.2 billion dead in the first hour. Civilization collapsed within days. Jackson closed his eyes, seeing the faces of children who would never grow up, families who would never reunite, dreams that would die in nuclear fire. When he opened them, his voice was steady. Guardian, activate Installation Prime. The response was immediate and terrifying. If the awakening of the standard railgun installations had been impressive, the activation of Installation Prime was apocalyptic. Seismic stations around the globe registered what appeared to be a magnitude 8 earthquake centered beneath the Arctic Ocean. The aurora borealis expanded to cover the entire northern hemisphere, and sensitive electronic equipment as far south as Mexico City suffered temporary disruption. In the Guardian's control chamber, the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energies. Installation Prime is online, the Guardian reported. Gravitational collapse system charging. Time to full operational status, 12 minutes. Jackson watched the tactical display as the alien suicide squadron continued their approach. The standard installations were firing continuously now, each salvo claiming dozens of targets, but it wasn't enough. Too many ships spread across too many vectors. Some would get through. Guardian, he said, as soon as installation prime is ready, use it. Dozens of targets, but it wasn't enough. Too many ships spread across too many vectors. Some would get through. Guardian, she said, as soon as installation prime is ready, use it. Acknowledged. However, I must note that installation prime's area of effect will extend beyond the immediate target zone. Any human vessels within the engagement area will be lost. Admiral Clark checked the orbital defense positions. Guardian, we have 17 platforms in potential engagement zones, with approximately 2,000 personnel. Jackson felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 2,000 lives against hundreds of millions. The mathematics were clear, but that didn't make the choice any easier. Evacuate what personnel you can, he ordered. Guardian, proceed with installation prime as planned. The next few minutes stretched like hours. On the tactical display, the alien suicide squadron drew closer to Earth, while the Guardian's weapons picked them off one by one. Each successful intercept was a small victory, but not enough. The numbers were relentless. At T-minus 30 seconds to installation prime activation, Admiral Clark reported that 14 of the 17 platforms had successfully evacuated their crews. 3 platforms, 2 damaged by the electromagnetic effects of the battle, remained crewed with skeleton teams who had volunteered to stay behind. Installation prime fully charged, the Guardian announced. Targeting solution confirmed, initiating gravitational collapse in 3, 2, 1, firing. What followed was not an explosion, but rather the opposite of an explosion, a sudden, violent compression of space-time itself. On the tactical display, a sphere of absolute darkness appeared in the path of the alien squadron. It lasted for exactly 3.7 seconds, and in that time, it consumed everything within a radius of 50,000 kilometers. 437 alien ships vanished into the artificial singularity, along with 3 human defense platforms and their volunteer crews. When the black hole evaporated in a burst of Hawking radiation, there was nothing left but empty space and the fading echoes of gravitational waves. The remaining alien ships, those lucky enough to be outside the engagement zone, found themselves facing a suddenly very different tactical situation. Their suicide attack had been reduced from overwhelming force to manageable threat. The Guardian's standard installations finished them off within minutes. In the control chamber, Jackson watched the last red icons disappear from the tactical display. The alien fleet, 10,000 ships that had threatened to extinguish human civilization, was gone. Destroyed by weapons that had been sleeping in Earth's crust for centuries, waiting for this moment. Threat neutralized, the Guardian reported. All enemy vessels destroyed or disabled. Earth's orbital space is secure. Jackson sank into the nearest chair. Around him, the chamber was filled with the quiet sounds of people breathing again, of hearts that had been frozen with terror beginning to beat normally. Casualty report? She asked. Admiral Clark consulted his displays. Human losses, 3 defense platforms with full crews, approximately 2,000 personnel. Several orbital installations suffered damage, but remained operational. Surface casualties appear to be minimal, mostly minor injuries from seismic effects. 2,000 people. In any other context, it would have been a tragedy of immense proportions, but measured against the extinction of human civilization, it felt like a miracle. Guardian, Jackson said, thank you. The patterns in the crystal column shifted to something he couldn't interpret. I exist to preserve human consciousness, President Jackson. This outcome represents optimal success parameters. But Reich looked troubled. As the immediate crisis passed, Jackson noticed that he was studying his portable display with growing concern. Commander, he asked, is there something else? Reich looked up, and his expression was grim. The battle's over, but the war isn't. Guardian, are you detecting any temporal anomalies? The Guardian's response was immediate. Affirmative. Multiple quantum field distortions detected at the edge of the solar system. Classification, temporal manipulation technology. The enemy appears to be attempting chronological intervention. Jackson felt reality tilt around him. What does that mean? It means, Reich said grimly, that we're about to learn why I really came back. The temporal distortions appeared at the edge of the solar system, like cracks in reality itself. The Guardian's deep space sensors detected them first. Quantum fluctuations that shouldn't exist, energy patterns that suggested space-time was being deliberately manipulated. In the control chamber, President Jackson watched the tactical display update to show new contacts materializing beyond Pluto's orbit. But these weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were absences, voids in space where matter and energy seemed to flow backward through time. "Guardian, what exactly are we looking at?" he asked. The patterns in the Guardian's crystal column swirled with what Jackson had learned to recognize as deep analysis. The contacts appear to be temporal manipulation platforms. They are generating chronoton fields designed to alter causal relationships within the local space-time matrix. Commander Reich had been monitoring the readings on his portable display, and his face was pale. "They're trying to undo the battle," he said. "Create a timeline where their invasion fleet never encountered Earth's defenses." Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Is that possible? With sufficient energy and technology? Yes. The hegemony developed temporal warfare capabilities after their conventional forces proved inadequate against human defenses. In my original timeline, they attempted similar interventions approximately 30 years after this battle. Admiral Clark looked up from his own tactical projections. But if they changed the timeline, wouldn't that erase our victory? Not necessarily, Reich replied. Time isn't as linear as most people assume. When you create competing causal loops, reality tends to negotiate between them. The question is which timeline has stronger causality anchors. The Guardian's voice carried a note of urgency. Analysis complete. The enemy platforms are attempting to create a localized temporal inversion field. If successful, they can retroactively eliminate Earth's defensive installations by preventing their historical placement. Jackson felt his understanding of physics crumble. They can unmake the past? They can create alternative pasts, Reich corrected. But there's a catch. Temporal manipulation requires massive energy expenditure and creates its own vulnerabilities. Guardian, can you target the manipulation platforms? Negative. The platforms exist partially outside normal space-time. Standard kinetic weapons cannot engage targets in temporal flux. Reich smiled grimly. Good thing we don't need to use standard weapons. Guardian, does Installation Prime retain targeting capability for temporal anomalies? The patterns in the Guardian's crystal shifted to what Jackson interpreted as surprise. Installation Prime was designed with exotic physics countermeasures. Theoretical capability exists for engaging targets in temporal flux, but such engagement has never been tested. There's a first time for everything, Reich said. President Jackson, I need you to authorize Installation Prime for temporal engagement. Jackson stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he was being asked to do. Use a weapon that created artificial black holes to shoot at targets that existed partially outside of time itself. Even by the standards of the last few hours, it seemed insane. What are the risks? He asked. Complete destruction of the solar system, Reich replied with brutal honesty. If we miscalculate the gravitational effects or create unstable temporal loops, we could tear a hole in space-time that would swallow everything from here to Alpha Centauri. And if we don't engage them? They successfully alter the timeline. Earth never develops defensive capabilities. Humanity becomes extinct 300 years ago. Jackson looked around the chamber at his advisors. Admiral Clark was studying the tactical projections with the intensity of a man trying to solve an impossible equation. Defense Minister Chen was running calculations that probably involved mathematics Jackson couldn't even pronounce. Commander Reich was watching the temporal distortions with the expression of a man who had lived through the consequences of inaction. Guardian, Jackson said finally, can you guarantee success? Negative. The probability matrices for temporal engagement are inherently unstable. However, I calculate a 67% chance of successfully neutralizing the enemy platforms without catastrophic space-time damage. 67%. Jackson had made political decisions based on worse odds, but never with the entire solar system at stake. Sir, Admiral Clark approached with updated intelligence reports. We're receiving fragmentary communications from deep space monitoring stations. They're reporting unusual phenomena throughout human space, timeline fluctuations, historical inconsistencies, reality distortions. Jackson felt the ground shift beneath his feet. It's already happening? Preliminary effects, Reich confirmed. The hegemony's platforms are testing their capabilities, creating minor temporal ripples to calibrate their systems. When they activate the main inversion field. He didn't need to finish. Jackson understood. They were running out of time. Literally. Guardian, charge Installation Prime for temporal engagement. The response was even more dramatic than the weapon's previous activation. The chamber filled with harmonics that seemed to resonate through dimensions humanity didn't have names for. The air itself became visible, rippling with gravitational distortions that made the laws of physics hiccup. Installation Prime charging for temporal engagement, the Guardian reported. Warning, exotic matter containment approaching critical thresholds. Recommend evacuation of all personnel to minimum safe distance. How far is minimum safe distance? Jackson asked. Approximately the orbit of Mars. Jackson looked at his advisors. I think we're staying. The charging process took nearly 20 minutes, and during that time, the temporal distortions at the edge of the solar system grew stronger. Space-time itself began to show stress fractures. Regions where causality broke down and effects preceded their causes. On Earth's surface, sensitive individuals began reporting strange experiences. Dreams that felt more real than reality. Memories of events that had never happened. Children drawing pictures of their grandparents as young adults, describing details they couldn't possibly know. Temporal field coherence at 90%, the Guardian announced. Enemy platforms have achieved preliminary synchronization. Estimate 6 minutes until full temporal inversion capability. Jackson watched the tactical display as reality fought with itself. The enemy platforms were creating overlapping fields of temporal distortion, trying to weave an alternative history where Earth had never been armed, where humanity had fallen to conventional invasion centuries ago. Installation Prime at full charge, the Guardian reported. Targeting solution confirmed. However, I must note that firing at temporal anomalies will create feedback effects throughout local spacetime. The outcome cannot be precisely predicted. Reich was studying his display with growing urgency. Jackson, we're out of time. The hegemony platforms are beginning final synchronization. In 3 minutes, they'll have enough temporal coherence to rewrite the last 5 centuries. Jackson took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history, past, present, and future, settling on his shoulders. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if this was how Admiral Wilson had felt 300 years ago when he had authorized the construction of Earth's secret weapons. Guardian, he said. Fire. What happened next defied description in any language that had evolved in normal spacetime. Installation Prime didn't just create a black hole. It created a gravitational singularity that existed across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. The weapon reached through time itself, striking at targets that were attempting to exist in several different centuries at once. The effect on local spacetime was dramatic. Reality cracked like glass. For a moment that lasted either microseconds or millennia, the laws of physics became suggestions rather than requirements. Light moved backward. Gravity flowed uphill. Causality became a circle instead of an arrow. In the Guardian's control chamber, Jackson experienced a moment of temporal displacement that showed him every possible outcome of his decisions simultaneously. He saw timelines where humanity thrived, where Earth became the center of a galactic civilization spanning millions of years. He saw timelines where the planet died, consumed by the weapons meant to protect it. He saw timelines where none of this had ever happened, where humanity had never reached for the stars. Then reality reasserted itself with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. The temporal distortions at the edge of the solar system collapsed inward, taking the hegemony platforms with them. The exotic matter that had fueled their time manipulation technology underwent rapid decay, releasing energies that briefly outshone nearby stars. Targets neutralized, the Guardian reported with mechanical satisfaction. Temporal anomalies collapsing. Space-time integrity restored to normal parameters. Jackson found himself sitting on the chamber floor, not entirely sure when he had fallen. Around him, the other humans were picking themselves up with the careful movements of people who weren't entirely convinced they still existed. Status report, he managed. Admiral Clark consulted displays that were still flickering with aftereffects of temporal distortion. All human installations reporting normal operation. The alien platforms appeared to have been completely destroyed. And he paused, checking his readings again. Sir, the timeline appears to be stable. We're still here. Earth still has its weapons, and history still remembers the last 5 hours. Reich was studying his portable display with something approaching wonder. It worked, he said quietly. The timeline is secure. Humanity's future as a galactic power is locked in. Jackson struggled to his feet, feeling like he had aged years in the last few minutes. Guardian, what's our status? All Gaia's Spear installations remain operational. Installation Prime requires a 72-hour cooldown period before temporal engagement capability can be restored. Earth's defensive capabilities remain at full effectiveness. And the broader situation? Long-range communications are being received from human colonies throughout local space. Reports indicate that hegemony forces throughout the region are withdrawing or surrendering. Intelligence suggests that news of Earth's defensive capabilities has spread rapidly through alien communication networks. Jackson nodded, then looked around the chamber at the people who had witnessed humanity's transition from near extinction to galactic supremacy. Thank you, he said simply. All of you. But even as he said it, he noticed that Commander Reich was beginning to look translucent. The edges of his form were becoming indistinct, as if he were fading from reality itself. The temporal loop is closing, he said, his voice carrying a strange echo. With the timeline secured, my presence here is no longer causally necessary. You're disappearing? Jackson asked. Reich smiled. I'm going home, to a timeline where humanity survived, where Earth became the fortress world it was always meant to be. My mission is complete. Wait, Jackson called. What about the future? What should we prepare for? Reich's form was fading rapidly now, but his voice remained clear. Build more worlds like Earth. Arm them. The galaxy is vast, and humanity has many enemies. But remember, the greatest weapon you possess isn't in the planet's crust. It's the will to use everything at your disposal to protect what matters. Then he was gone, leaving only empty air and the faint scent of ozone.